On today's edition of Locked On Eagles, we take a first look at this high-pressure, important game on Sunday against the New Orleans Saints. All that and more on this Wednesday edition of your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast, Locked On Eagles.
You are Locked On Eagles, your daily Philadelphia Eagles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
We thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. I'm Lou DiBiase. He's Gino Camilleri. It's a Wednesday edition of the show, and today's episode is brought to you by Ultimate Football GM. Ever dreamed of becoming an NFL general manager and managing your football franchise? Then this game is definitely for you. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Our listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON in all caps in the game. Gino, we're taking a first look today at this big game on Sunday against the New Orleans Saints. The magic number is still 1 with 2 weeks to go. The Eagles need one win to not only clinch the NFC East Division Championship, but also the number 1 seed in the NFC, or a loss from the Vikings and the Dallas Cowboys over these final 2 weeks. So, man, it's a big game coming up, and who knows who's going to be available for this one. Looking at the Wednesday injury report, we know Lane Johnson's going to be out at least until the playoffs. I don't know if Avonte Maddox is coming back this year. Jalen Hurts missed the walkthrough today. We'll see if he plays. Miles Sanders didn't practice. A.J. Brown limited. The pressure is on. I mean, there's I think a positive and negative way you can look at this. The sky isn't falling, but you need this win on Sunday, man. You don't want to go into week 18 without all of this locked up.
And this feels very, very, very similar to 2017. The last couple weeks where you need just one win,
right?
Everything seems to be going wrong. Your quarterback's injured once again. One of your tackles is out, sustained an injury. Lane Johnson will be out until the playoffs. Mm-hmm. It seems very reminiscent to that 2017 team where adversity was their middle name. And here we are once again having to play a team in New Orleans, which has always been a back and forth. This is one of those games where these two teams have had each other's numbers. Over the years, we've seen New Orleans take their fair share of games in some of the more important spots. But then in the regular season, you have seen, outside of that blowout win by the Saints a couple years back, the Eagles have done pretty well in the regular season.
Jalen's had his number for sure. That's what's unfortunate if he doesn't play.
Yeah. But Gardner Minshew, with the way he played last week, you would believe that if he had to step up in this spot once again, with the game that he played last week, he's only going to improve over what he did against the Cowboys. They played a terrible game all around. Miles Sanders having a fumble, just big-time moments, making little plays that came back to bite them in the end. And 4 turnovers in your 2 losses. You've had 8 in both of those games combined. There's only one way to go, and it's to fix that error, and it's to fix the turnover error. As long as you have 80% of this roster, it should be good enough to go and beat New Orleans if you do what you have done in those 13 wins. Take care of the football, win the time of possession battle, don't allow 3rd and 30 situations, and just allow a team to stay around and lose 40-34.
And, kind of like 2017, I'll take any win you can get to clinch, right? A win is going to be a win this Sunday. It's just so week 18, you can have some guys start to rest. You can have that home field advantage locked up. You get that extra week for Jalen Hurts to keep that shoulder healing. And, with Lane Johnson's abdominal injury, this reminds me a lot of 2019 with Deshaun Jackson, right? He also chose not to have surgery, which would have guaranteed he's out for at least, 10 weeks. And then he wanted to rehab and come back sooner. Comes back too soon. The pain tolerance was tough, and then he re-injures it. So give Lane Johnson as much time as possible. So this is a big win. And you look at 2017, it was against the at the time the Oakland Raiders on Christmas Eve, and that was an awful game from the offense. It started the talks of, man, are they going to start Nate Sudfeld in the playoffs? But the win was huge, Gino, because you don't win that game. If you have to travel on the road to Atlanta or Minnesota, I don't know if you win the Super Bowl.
Without a doubt. And we know that the road has to go through Lincoln Financial Field once again, and you don't want to play that additional game. And especially in this situation with your quarterback having that injury, if he doesn't play at all and you need all of that time, well, you better get the bye week so you don't have to rush him back into action and potentially re-injure that shoulder if that time is necessary. If not, and he's ready to go this Sunday, Lou, I think you're in a good situation to win this game. And even without Jalen Hurts, you should be in a position to where hopefully you have a better roster than that team that played that Oakland Raiders game where
And you do.
it just seemed nothing went right in that game. I remember sitting there and less people around me at Christmas were watching that game.
The non-Eagles family slowly started to filter out the room.
It was just me, and then everybody was there, and then by the third quarter, everybody was gone. But this go around, it's against the Saints, Lou, who they're going to be throwing Andy Dalton out there, who is a steep drop-off from Dak Prescott, who you played last week.
And outside of Chris Olave, like no weapons really. I mean, you stop Alvin Kamara.
If you stop Juwan Johnson at tight end and Alvin Kamara, who's injured, we don't even know if he's going to play right now. Chris Olave has a hamstring injury as well. He was on the report today. This is a banged-up Saints team. Yeah, they're fighting for the division, but the additional cherry on top for you locking up the 1 seed is that you could potentially lock up having a better pick by knocking New Orleans out of the race for the NFC.
Absolutely. You don't want this pick to go from it was at 4th overall at one point to they win the division and they're guaranteed they're picking like 18 to 20, depending on the order of how things fall. So yeah, that's another wrinkle of why this game is extremely important. And Gino, again, like I said, a win is just going to be a win on Sunday. I'll take a win in the 2017 Raiders style. And you look at what the Saints do well on defense. Outside of Philadelphia, they've actually allowed the fewest passing yards per game in the entire NFL. So to me, here's the fix, right? Gardner Minshew threw the ball really well last week, of course, but you have a backup quarterback in. You're going to have a backup right tackle in if it's Jack Driscoll or maybe Jordan Mailata moves and Andre Dillard plays left side. Regardless, to me, the way to win this game, when the Eagles are in doubt, what do they do better than anything? It's run the football. And as you said, take over time of possession, run through the elite interior of this offensive line where you've got Jason Kelsey, Landon Dickerson, Isaac Seumalo. And honestly, I think too, how you get a backup or a guy that's switching positions in more of a rhythm at a new spot is by running the football well. So to me, run this, and hopefully Miles Sanders is okay. He didn't practice on Wednesday, but run this offense to me on Sunday through Sanders in that offensive line.
It has to be balanced. If Miles Sanders does go, he didn't practice today. We know that. But even without him, you should still have enough trust in Kenneth Gainwell and Boston Scott behind that offensive line. It's a great point, Lou. New Orleans is underrated when it comes to how good their pass defense is.
Yeah.
And they've been in a lot of close games because of their defense. And Nick Sirianni said it in his press conference today because he always scouts the defense of the opposing team. And he just went down the list. He just kept naming guys. He's like, look at the corner out of Stanford, talking about Paulson Adebo. He's lengthy. He does this well. You got Cameron Jordan. Yeah, we know this team. This is a team that's been around the playoffs, been in games where they've beat the Philadelphia Eagles in the playoffs just a couple of years back. And it's a lot of the same figures. You have guys like Marshawn Lattimore who are still playing at an exceptionally high level back there. You got Bradley Roby, who you can't forget about as he's just been a solid nickel corner forever.
And it feels like he's played for a million different teams, but he just can't find a long-term home.
100%. Marcus May is playing good ball back there, as well as Tyrann Mathieu. They have a lot of studs on the back end. So you have to go through the middle of this defense where you still have to go through DeMario Davis. You're still going to have to go through the interior, which has David Onyemata. You have Shai Tuttle, Carl Granderson, Cameron Jordan. It's not the best unit that you've ever played. So like you said, you have to go through your run game, go through the elite offensive line, regardless if it's Andre Dillard, regardless if it's Jack Driscoll. You're going to have to figure out a way to get some push. And this is the game. This is December football. It's going to be a New Year's Day game. You're right in the mix of what type of style of ball you're going to be playing in the playoffs. Get that blueprint ready to go. But above everything, the defense has to step up. They know that they have to win this game, especially after the outcome of last week.
They owe the offense after that performance in Dallas, allowing 40 points when you have a backup quarterback in. The fact that you almost won in a shootout, very impressive. And, Gino, they're going to be able to throw the football when you have Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, and Dallas Goedert. But I totally agree. I think, run the football, rely on your offensive line, and control time of possession. Just get out of Sunday with a win, no matter how it looks, even against an inferior opponent. the Saints have a lot to play for. And like you said, too, we want that higher pick in 2023. We'll continue to take a first look at this matchup against New Orleans coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast. And today's Locked On Eagles is sponsored by Ultimate Football GM. We're really geeked out here at Locked On Eagles about our new partner and sponsor at Ultimate Football GM. If you've ever dreamed of becoming an NFL GM and managing your football franchise, well, your dream can come true, and this game is definitely for you. Manage every strategic aspect of your team. You can play through the season and lead your team to glory. You're responsible for hiring the right coaches and coordinators, trading players, making draft picks, navigating through your free agency and the draft, and all of the ups and downs of a season, all in this challenging and realistic game world. Ultimate Football GM is completely free and playable offline as well without Wi-Fi or data. Play on the go as you want to, when you want to. We've been having a lockdown league over the past few months trying this game out. A lot of fun. Get your friends in on the action. Locked On Eagles listeners get a 100% free boost to their franchise when using the promo code LOCKEDON. It's LOCKEDON in all caps in the game store. That's Locked On. So make sure to check it out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the App Store. That's ultimate-gm.com. Ultimate Football GM. Start your dynasty today. This is Locked On Eagles. Thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen each and every day. Guys, make sure your second listen is the Locked On Sports Today podcast. The biggest stories around the sports world in 20 minutes or less, plus instant reactions, game recaps, and Locked On's take of the day. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. So, Gino, we kind of took a first look at this Eagles-Saints matchup on Sunday. The Eagles have had their number over the last 2 years, back-to-back wins. Jalen Hurts' first start in 2020. Dominated. We all remember when he juked that lineman to another planet last year with that ankle, yep. Carl Granderson, complete ankle breaker. So they're 2-0 in the last 2 years. The Saints are trying to win a division, though. The Eagles are trying to lock up the 1 seed and the division. I think there's 2 ways to look at this, Gino. We kind of talked about the injury report and how to get this win. Just overall, the outlook on the Birds right now, like the glass half full perspective is, yes, even with all these injuries, outside of Avonte Maddox, you're really not expected to lose anybody for the season compared to 2017, where Jason Peters wasn't coming back. Carson Wentz wasn't coming back. Darren Sproles was not coming back. Neither was Jordan Hicks, whereas, yeah, Avonte Maddox probably done, but Chauncey Gardner-Johnson could be back within the next week or two. Lane Johnson, he's going to play through the injury and return for the playoffs. Jalen Hurts is expected to come back. Jordan Davis as well. You know, everybody else is limited. So that's the glass half full perspective. Not to mention you only need 1 win in 2 weeks to clinch. Mm-hmm. And even if you don't get those wins, are we banking on Dallas and Minnesota not blowing it? Minnesota plays Green Bay and Chicago. Dallas plays Tennessee and Washington. All 4 of those teams, well, 3 of the 4, not Chicago, they have stuff to play for. So I think that's the glass half full perspective, is the sky is definitely not falling right now.
No, and that's why I say it's very similar to 2017, where all it really took was one of those last couple games to get a win. And going back to last week, it's the 3rd of 3 road games that you consecutively played. It was against a division opponent without your starting quarterback. You're tied for the season high in turnovers on the year.
Right.
Things situationally just didn't.
And you only lost by 6.
Yes, in a game where 74 points were scored. It's not like you lost 16-10. Right. You still put up a gosh darn good amount of points. And the thing with New Orleans is they struggle to score points. They're averaging around like 20 points a game, which the Eagles can do that with their hands tied behind their back. They've only scored that few points one time all year, and that was against Arizona, if I'm not mistaken, in that 20-17 win that they had over them. So you have to expect this Eagles team to, one, get back on track, right their wrongs of last week. They've had a absurd amount of turnovers in the last 5 weeks. I think they're tied for the highest in the NFL right now.
Before that, they had the fewest.
Yes, exactly. So that turnaround they need to get figured out as well. And this is a game where, I don't know about you, I know people in that Eagles organization still don't like New Orleans from stuff that has happened in the past. I will
never, when they play dreams and nightmares in that locker room after winning a divisional game against us, they were dead to me.
The Alvin Kamara, Mark Ingram, when they put the ski masks on after 2018, after quote unquote getting retribution.
Nothing brought me more joy than seeing them get robbed of that NFC title. And then they complained the entire offseason.
Yeah, and they've never been a team that's been able to just get it done. It's been since 2007 since they were in a Super Bowl, but we're not going to visit that topic. But this is a game where if you look at the players that have been on that side of the ball and the wrong end of it, guys like Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, they were all a part of that blowout. Oh, they have something to play for in this game. And this would just be great because right now, Lou, talking about if they win this division, Tampa, who's currently 7-8 and leading the NFC South, they would be picking 20th in the draft.
Yeah.
Right now, the Saints are currently picking 10th. So that's a swap of 10 spots.
Right.
So right now,
huge.
get the win, get the number 1 seed, give yourself more optionality when it comes to resting guys down the stretch. And going back to your main point of not losing these guys for the whole year, the reinforcements are coming. 2017 was like Dunkirk. If anybody who is big into history or who has ever seen that movie Dunkirk, we got to get the guys off the beach. All we got here is all we are going to get. We don't have reinforcements coming in. We have to get our guys back to safety and figure out a way to put it together, get a battle plan, and go forth into the playoffs. Right now, this is like D-Day where you just have reinforcements coming in the next wave and the next wave and the next wave. Jordan Davis barely played in that first game that he came back off of IR, and he has a concussion. We don't even know if he is going to be ready to go on this Sunday. Jalen Hurts should be coming back roaring and ready to go. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson is itching to get back on the football field. You just see him tweet. He's tweeting through it every single
against
Sunday.
New Orleans. They traded him away. They didn't think he could be a more versatile player, and he's leading the league or he was, I think still is, leading the league in interceptions, despite moving to a spot New Orleans didn't think he could play. So, yeah, Gino, that's the thing. I mean, glass half empty approach, though, is at the same time, they're playing a team fighting for a division that has a pretty good defense. And then next week, you're playing a team that's fighting for a playoff spot in New York as a divisional opponent. So the pressure is on. You are banged up, and you got to secure a win because you don't want to have to rely on Dallas and Minnesota to lose games. You don't want to head into week 18 with the feet still to the fire and maybe force Jalen Hurts out there if he's not officially ready. So, at the same time, you got to get this one for sure Sunday. So there's definitely some pressure, but I trust this team. I mean, every time they've been in a pressure situation on the road in a close game with injuries and turnovers, they managed to figure things out. So, I'm not panicking. If the 2018 and 2019 Eagles could find a way at the end, I trust this team will.
Oh, totally. Yeah, that you go back to the idea of righting the wrongs. The one thing that they did right, even in those seasons where things did not go exactly as planned, was they found a way to win down the stretch.
Right.
And a lot of those key pieces have been around those runs that are still here. The BGs, the Fletcher Cox of the world. These guys have seen those stretch runs and know what it takes. Jason Kelsey, Lane Johnson. Just guys like Lane Johnson even being willing to play through that injury to know what is left to play for. All of these guys know that the goal isn't just to get the 1 seed. It's not just to win the NFC East. The prize is another Lombardi trophy, and they're going to do anything that they can. And this organization is going to put all of the chips in. They already have, and they're going to do it with a level head. They're not going to force Jalen Hurts back out there if they don't need to before the playoffs, because they know when they get all of these guys back in the building, Lou, this is going to be a team that it's just going to be tough to play them, because you saw last week, even in a game where things didn't go right, they still put up 34 points against a division opponent on the road. It's just going to be hard to beat this team, and this New Orleans team does have a lot to play for, but the Eagles, it's a game about who's the toughest. The Eagles are going to be toughest.
And let's put it in perspective, too. The only reason the Saints have something to play for, I mean, they're multiple games under 500, is because they're in the worst division in football, or maybe the second worst if we're throwing in the other South, the AFC South as well. So, yes, this team is fighting for a division title, but it's not like this is a Dallas Cowboys level team that you were playing last week, another second place or third place team in a division that's fighting for a spot. It's just more of a matter of circumstance, like the NFC East has been in previous years outside of 2022. Gino, we'll continue to take a look at this matchup. Want to take a look at the standings too and talk about some potential playoff opponents coming up next right here on the Locked On Eagles podcast.
Before we do that, this episode of Locked On Eagles is brought to you by our friends over at Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure you are going to love. You're obviously listening to LOE here on the Locked On Podcast Network, and you love football. So that's why you'll be able to find an episode from The League available on a bonus episode at Locked On NFL, narrated by Super Bowl champion and legendary smack talker Richard Sherman and sports broadcaster and rising star Taylor Rooks. The League is an 8-part docuseries about the most bizarre, inspirational, and unlikely stories connected to America's favorite sport, pro football. Our bonus episode is called The Way of the Cowboy. Oh, goodness. And the incredible story of the 1977 Dallas Cowboys brought in Bruce Lee's protege to teach the defense martial arts, ushering in a new approach to the way the league trained. Head over to Locked On NFL for a bonus episode of The League, or catch the full series wherever you get your podcasts. Available now. Audible, get in the game.
This is the Locked On Eagles podcast. I'm Louis DiBiase. He is Gino Camilleri. We're getting you ready for Sunday's game against New Orleans. 1 win in 2 weeks, and the Eagles are NFC East champions and the number 1 seed in the NFC. Gino's going to take a deeper look into this matchup with Locked On Saints host Ross Jackson tomorrow on Crossover Thursday. We also have a show for you Friday as well. Gino, as we talked about, a lot of injuries. I wanted to get your thoughts on this. I talked about it yesterday, and we've had this discussion before, but it's kind of like positional switches versus just best players available on the field when it comes to like a lot of injuries here. So you think about Lane Johnson, not playing at right tackle, and Avonte Maddox being out in the slot. Those are the main 2 spots where you're like, okay, because sometimes teams, and the Eagles like to do this a lot, they don't like to have multiple position changes, right? To kind of keep the harmony and the rhythm. But other teams might prefer to just get the best combination of players on the field. So with like right tackle, you could think, should we just keep Jordan Mailata on the left side and put Jack Driscoll on the right? Or is a better combination Andre Dillard at the left tackle spot and Mailata moving over to right tackle, which he's done before? And it's kind of the same thing with Maddox in the slot. You remove him. Would you rather have Chauncey Gardner-Johnson back and play deep and have Josiah Scott still in there, or move CJJ down and then have like Reed Blankenship play at safety? Where do you fall when it comes to kind of the philosophy there with what strategy you take?
You definitely have to attack it differently. And
sure,
I think going back.
Yeah, I guess context for each position changes and who you play.
Yeah, looking at history with the Eagles, it's kind of been rough sledding when they moved the left tackle to right tackle. The original was when they, or either or vice versa, where they moved Lane Johnson from right tackle to left tackle when Jason Peters went down in the Sam Bradford year, I believe, as well. Yeah. And they moved Jordan Mailata there last year when Lane Johnson went down, and it wasn't the easiest stretch for Mr. Mailata. It's a tough task to completely change in 90% way through the season the position that you're playing on the offense.
Well, it's ridiculous to talk about this at all. You have a 4-year first-round talent on the bench that's supposed to be a swing tackle, and you don't trust him to play the right side. Is kind of ridiculous still.
Yeah, it's definitely an insane thing that he can't even step up to the task now. But I would be intrigued that potentially they could try him there.
Again.
It's been a couple years since he has done that. I think that was his rookie year.
That was against Seattle, 2019. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So that it's been quite some time. But Jack Driscoll, his natural position is right tackle as well. I would like to keep Jordan Mailata at left tackle, especially in these last 2 games. You're going to be going against Cam Jordan. You're going against Azeez Ojulari and Kayvon Thibodeau against the Giants if you have to win that game.
Well, and what if Lane is, the thing is too, if Lane comes back in the playoffs, I think then you definitely keep Mailata at left. Maybe if you knew Johnson wasn't coming back, you'd want to start that transition. But I guess it would depend on if you are very confident Johnson's coming back.
I believe that you could get through a game without having to move Jordan Mailata to right tackle to win that game. Because when it comes to protection, you can have Jack Driscoll in there, and he could have support from Dallas Goedert, who is now back healthy, as an additional blocker on that side. If Miles Sanders is ready to go, you'll be able to add his ability in pass protection as well to help out on that side. I would like to keep Jordan at left tackle. When it comes to the defense, though, I think you have to get creative, because clearly we saw when the creativity was lacking last week, when you just throw out a black and white game plan and you are afraid to go away from that, how easy it can be for an offense to pick you apart. So you kind of have to change it up. I think you have to present multiple looks. The problem last week was you didn't get away from Josiah Scott being the only option in the slot to defend CeeDee Lamb. You have to change that up. You have to try something. So when Chauncey does come back, you absolutely should explore that option.
Because if I'm a team like Minnesota and I run into the Eagles in the NFC title and they don't switch it up, I'm throwing Justin Jefferson in the slot every play.
Every play. It's not even a question.
Yeah, so I would put CGJ inside and Kev Blankenship deep, or I'm telling you, man, they got to play more man coverage and let your two elite man coverage corners go after the best weapons, regardless of where they're lining up on the field.
Maybe it's some crazy long con that Jonathan Gannon has that he doesn't want to give away his master plan for the playoffs to just play 100% man coverage by only playing zone coverage in the regular season. I hope that's what we see. But ultimately, it's going to come down to playing your best players against their best players. And the thing that drives me crazy with this team sometimes, especially when it comes down to the offense, is the idea of forcing plays and not players. Because last week you were forcing Quez Watkins. You've been forcing Boston Scott at times. Think about the guys that are going to make the plays. Like putting Josiah Scott against CeeDee Lamb is downright insane, especially when he wasn't even the starter for that week of practice.
And, I get that, most defenses in the NFL, pretty much all of them, are never going to line up with how a lot of us prefer to play defense. And you're going to play zone most of the time. And most of the time this year for the Eagles, what they do works. They've been number one in pretty much every statistical category. It's when it's not working, you have the pieces to adjust and to play both coverages.
That's the thing. You looked at the graphic that they put up during the game last week that says Dak Prescott is 19 for 19.
He finished 24 of 24 against zone, Gino.
Against zone coverage. So when you talk about something that quite literally was not working, and the definition of insanity is doing that over and over again,
I felt like I was insane watching it.
You were. You quite literally were, because every time, no hyperbole, 24 out of 24 attempts in zone, they completed a pass. So to say that we are the crazy ones is downright wrong. It's Jonathan Gannon. He's the one going out there making the same call over and over again. And if you are going to do that, like you said, Lou, good offensive coordinators, good game planners, especially late into the season, what's going to happen in the Super Bowl, Lou, when you're going up against Zach Taylor, who's scheming up those three wide receivers against Cincinnati, or you look at what Ken Dorsey is doing in Buffalo, and you look at what Andy Reid could do to you with the Saints. You have to try something different, because you will get absolutely drubbed in those games if you do what you did.
And he eventually adjusted where he started to bracket coverage more with, Wallace and Scott were on Lamb. But sometimes with Gannon, it just takes too long to get there. It's like, 7 catches and 100 yards later, you're there. But at that point, it's like the damage has already been done. He's got to be quicker to adjust. And to me, at the same time, though, if there's an offense, like if an offense has 3 amazing weapons, like if you play San Francisco, that's fine. You're not going to, Slay can't and Bradbury can't cover everybody. You're going to have to, Scott's got to cover somebody. CGJ's got to cover somebody. But it's when an offense like Dallas has clearly one elite target that they are moving around.
Minnesota,
and that's the only guy. Yeah, Minnesota is like, I'm not scared of KJ Osborne. I'm not scared of Jalen Reagor and Adam Thielen. It's just Justin Jefferson. And against Minnesota, it worked when you just had Darius Slay take him out of the football game. So it's against those kind of offenses, especially where you can afford to adjust and be more aggressive.
If you are the one that is reacting this late into the season, it's usually not a good situation. And the thing that, honestly, Jim Schwartz, it might have been the downfall of his career, was that he just kept doing the same thing over and over again. And
I felt like me and you from 2017 to 2020 were just like beating a dead horse.
Right. And the slight margin of time where it worked to a T, just enough to get by to the Super Bowl, was that little stretch in Atlanta and Minnesota where everything that they did went right.
Yeah.
But if things went wrong, you have to have a near perfect performance like you did out of Nick Foles in 2017 in that Super Bowl. Or even last week when your defense doesn't step up, you have to have a near perfect game from Gardner Minshew in the offense. That's not a situation you want to be in.
Gino, what were your thoughts, by the way, on Foles' 3 picks with the Colts on Monday? It continues to be the craziest career in the history of sports, man. He literally
got to take him out the pasture at this time, man. He's done. He's washed.
I get why he didn't want to come back to the Eagles, man. He's like, that is the only perfect part of my career that I am not going in to tamper with. Like it's incredible. He was Superman when he was in Philadelphia, and everywhere else he was a nobody. It's truly one of the most unique stories I've ever seen.
And that's why you got to just continue to ride your team while it's hot and have to adjust, because you can't go into a season with one hand, or into a postseason rather, with one hand tied behind your back. You have to have both fists taped up, ready to go. You have to be the one with the crazy eyes walking into the playoffs saying, we are going to attack you for 60 minutes in Lincoln Financial Field, where the NFC is running through to the Super Bowl, because the Eagles are going to go and get a win there this Sunday against the New Orleans Saints to wrap up the NFC East and the number 1 seed in the NFC.
Gino's going to take a bigger look into this matchup tomorrow with Ross Jackson of Locked On Saints. Guys, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Eagles for a show Monday through Friday on all podcast platforms and on YouTube as well. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On Birds, at GC24_football, and at DiBiase LOE. Once again, thank you so much for making Locked On Eagles your first listen today and every day. Make sure your second listen is the Locked On Sports Today podcast. Peter Bukowski brings you the biggest stories from around the world of sports in 20 minutes. Get the analysis and opinions before anybody else with our local and national experts and insiders. Locked On Sports Today, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. For Gino Camilleri, I'm Lou DiBiase signing off on this Wednesday edition of Locked On Eagles. As always, thank you for downloading. Thank you for watching and listening. And let's go Birds.
Fly, Eagles, fly.